All right, welcome to another Living Freestyle adventure. What happened was one day in university, one of my college buddies and I were chatting, and he and I did a lot of fun adventures together in school, and we found out about a submarine. There was a submarine wreck dive that was just off the coast of North Carolina. And so we were going to go do this wreck dive. Now, this was like, dive computers weren't fully a thing yet, and this was a super deep dive at 120 plus feet. You only get like 8 minutes down there and things like that, and there's lots of decompression stops and everything along the way. But dude, this sounded like just right up our alley, and he and I used to, we skydived together, we did a bunch of stuff together. So we hop in a car and we're cruising out to go do this dive. Now, there's a couple few things that happen as a result of this little adventure. As we're driving, we're going back and forth. Yeah, I know I don't get seasick. I've never gotten seasick, and at this point, this was true. I generally didn't get seasick. And talking the talk, and we stopped. We had this monster Southern style breakfast, right? I'm talking like way too much food, waffles and everything, eggs and sauce, everything. Comes important later. We get out to the coast, and the dive, this is November also, by the way, and I'm thinking the water's going to be freezing, but it turns out the way the currents work on that, in the South Atlantic, they're coming up from the equator, so the water actually ended up being pretty warm. But what was happening was, as we got there, there was a storm that was coming in. I think it might have been a tropical storm, but whatever it was, there was a storm that was coming in. And for some reason, we still went out. And maybe it wasn't bad enough or whatever, but we got on this little fishing boat, and this dive was a 3+ hour boat ride out to sea in rough seas. And, as we're going, the seas are just pumping, and in addition to that, it starts raining, and so now we're all huddled underneath this little fishing boat roof thing. And the woman across from me is smoking. And so as she smokes, she just right in your face, which does not help with seasickness at all. It turns out rough seas, not fun. And then on top of that, you have somebody blowing smoke in your face the whole way. We get out there, and I looked at my buddy, pride aside. I was like, I am not going underwater feeling like this. And so I went to the back of the boat to feed the fish. And so I looked over, and he was right on the other side of the engine, also feeding the fish. So the only time I did not feel seasick on this dive was when I was at least 15 plus 20, maybe 20-ish feet underwater. A huge part of that is because it was probably 15+ foot swells. And so you had to get down below, where the swell lines were for everything to stabilize. So, once you got down to 20 feet, everything stopped rocking. I finally stopped feeling sick, and I was thankful that we were down there. Now, getting back to the point of the story, ultimately, because of conditions and things like that, we actually were not able to get to the submarine. We ended up on an oil tanker wreck that was also at like 100+ feet or something like that instead. And we still had a great dive, but didn't get to the submarine as much as I wanted to. And the thing that was interesting was, because we were so deep, on the way up, we had all of our decompression stops. And the seas with the storm and everything were really rough. And the currents were crazy strong. So as we would come up to do our decompression stops, we'd hold on to the anchor lines. And you're basically horizontal, like Superman, right? While this is happening, because the current is so strong. And we finally get up to the last stop, and there was a few of us. We couldn't all be holding the anchor line, and they had tied a safety stop line to the anchor. That was basically like flat horizontal, like it was in a hurricane wind, because the currents were so strong. So we're all hanging on to this safety line at 20 feet doing our last decompression stop, and we are working so hard that air is actually starting to become a problem. And then sure enough, what happens is the safety line snaps. And in an effort to try to stay as close to the boat as we can, we're kicking as hard as we can against the current. And it doesn't matter. We can't fight this current. It's way too strong. And so ultimately what ended up happening was we burned through our air. And for the first time ever, and only time ever, I ran out of air while scuba diving. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, one of the things is when I started diving, there was always this, oh no, you're gonna run out of air and not realize it happened to you and you're gonna get stuck. Dude, there's no way, okay? As your tank starts getting under pressured, and you know what, in hindsight, I almost recommend everybody takes a tank that's almost empty and try breathing out of it so they know what it feels like when you actually do run out of air, because there's all kinds of signs. As you're getting to the end of your tank, it actually starts getting hard to breathe. And I remember very distinctly that last breath, you have to just suck that last breath out. It's not like all of a sudden you turn around and you run out of air. So we had about a minute left on our safety stop, and I was more afraid of the bends than running out of air, obviously. And also I was at 20 feet, so I was safe. Sucked the last breath of air out of my regulator and finished off the last 30 seconds or minute or so at 20 feet, and then came up to the surface, breathing on the way up, right? Never hold your breath. It's the golden rule, right? We get to the surface and we are so far from the boat, it's ridiculous. There is no way. I mean, we're trying to swim back, we can't get there. And eventually they got the message, they were able to find us, and the boat came and picked us up, and took us on the nice 3-hour journey back to shore, which thankfully was better on the way back because you were going with the waves as they were blowing in, so it wasn't quite as bad on the way back as it was on the way there. But that is the first time I ever actually got legit seasick and had to feed the fish. I would have stayed underwater that whole trip if I could have. And it's also the first and only time I ran out of air while scuba diving. And there's some really cool lessons learned there, and ultimately ended up being a good thing. But also the last time I dove in a tropical-ish storm, so I'm not sure how we got approval to do that or what the dive master was thinking or anything like that. But it was definitely a fun adventure. It was a very cool wreck. I'm bummed we didn't get to see the submarine, which was the whole point of the trip. But ultimately, we had a lot of fun stories afterwards anyways.